All right, I can hear you now.
Okay, so Shabbat Shalom, welcome. It's first of all, it's nice to have a full table. Thanks for everybody coming all the way out to, well, not you, John. You just probably rode your bike or something. But thanks for joining us. This is our dialogue session where we attempt to talk sensibly about a topic and cover some of the things that we talked about in the class. We can hopefully follow what's going on the internet. We see that Joanne is with us now. Hopefully everything is okay. She had to go to the doctor this morning, so we prayed and hope that everything's fine. You can let us know. That's good to see you with us this morning. So, listen, learn, guard, and do, my translation. We were talking during the break a little bit about that and how words have meanings, but those meanings change over time. And the example that John and I were discussing concerns the word that I'm saying, guard, right? In Hebrew, shamar, and it's a sheen, a mem, and a resh. You can look this up and do a word study on it. It was translated quite frequently in many English translations by the word keep. Now the trick is that keep today doesn't mean what it meant when that word was selected. So years ago, I think Glenn Chatterton taught a class, and he talked about a keep, like a guard, one who watches, but it has a meaning more associated with what we would say today as guard. And so, but these words, again, there's flexibility there. I just want people to understand that these four words can occur together in part or in whole. And so that's the idea there. Someone just asked if that extra chair is for Elijah, Mark Williams in England. And yes, that's who that's for, Mark. Good observation. Welcome, Elijah, and any other guests who are here that we don't see among us. That's a little bit more mystical than I typically will go in a dialogue. So, what are your thoughts today following that class? Years ago I taught it. Today was sort of a refresher, but I added quite a bit to it. Anybody have any prevailing thoughts? Or?
I do.
Okay.
The listening part.
Okay.
You brought that up, that's first and foremost, that we should listen. And for these 12 or so years I've been studying with you, you know my heart has always been, I've been burned by men and women teaching what the Word of God means in the past. So when we listen, I think I've come to the point where faith is very important, to trust Jehovah that whatever I'm listening to on the search for the truth, that ultimately he has to somehow confirm to me that what I'm hearing is the truth.
Yeah.
So maybe we could
How do you do that?
It's got to be through prayer. And whenever I know that you talk about, understanding the Hebrew, and you bring out a good point that, Deuteronomy being in this first person is a hint that these truly are the words of Moses that have been handed down. So, I don't know. I guess that's my question, Ross, is at the base, in my heart, it's like, well, how do I know that this is true?
Well, one of the things that ties into what we were talking about on the break is there is a difference in our modern application and our modern, we read a verse and we think, oh, well, hear the word of Jehovah. How do you hear the word of Jehovah? Well, according to Deuteronomy, there would be these prophets, right? You're not going to go consult, Deuteronomy 18 says, you're not going to go consult mediums and wizards and things like that, which is what a lot of people in the world are doing, this revived a New Age type movement where you go to Sister Eve and, get your palm read or something. Those are methods that are used by the nations. According to the Hebrew Bible, God doesn't say it doesn't work. What he says, though, is that that's not the way you're going to do it. God's going to raise up a prophet. So here's the thing. In our day, who is the prophet? And I would argue that I don't think that there are prophets operating. Now, others would argue that. Some would say, well, I believe there's a gift of prophecy and some people have it. I'm not to debate that today. What I'm saying, we don't have an Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, somebody like that. What I do think, though, is that we have the words of the prophets. And when I talk about hearing the word of Jehovah, there was a method whereby, we can say, well, I pray about it. I have to learn to trust my heart and so forth, and all those things are important. Also important is Deuteronomy 31:10, beginning in 31:10. What they would do is, in order to make sure that this process continued, every 7 years, in the year of release, during the Festival of Booths in Tabernacles, Sukkot, everyone would gather together, and this would be read aloud in their hearing. So they would literally hear the word. And the hearing of the word would cause these other things. They would learn to fear, and they would learn to guard, and so forth and so on. And that's what Deuteronomy 31:10 through 14 describes. And what happens is, in many religious circles, the preacher, priest, whatever, will take maybe a little snippet, generally out of context, pontificate on it, add in a few stories that are irrelevant to the text, taken out of context, and that's what most people are hearing. But I think it's important, part of the process of learning is to hear. In fact, one other point, and this comes from the Christian writings, faith comes by hearing the Word of God. I like that, because I think that by hearing, literally hearing the Word, it does have this way of penetrating into our innermost beings. Now, once you hear it and you know what it says, it becomes more difficult for false teachings to creep in. That's just my take on it.
So it's important then to continue, even though we don't do this anymore, to have this reading system of the Torah and prophet readings every week, to try to keep up with it, to try to keep it before us.
I think I would expand it beyond the Torah readings. I think that the Word is described as the Word of God through these prophetic figures. Yes, the Torah contains some of it. But what happens is people, they think, okay, we're going to do the weekly, the annual, the triennial, whatever, and we're going to read the I think that's important. But I also think that when you follow those cycles, you miss so much of the prophetic revelation. And so what we're trying to do now is incorporate other readings as well. But if someone wants to, they could read these Torah portions, and that would certainly help.
That's what I'm saying. That, I agree with what you're doing as far as
I got you.
More into the prophets. But I find myself not doing the Torah portions like I used to. And so I'm a little concerned.
No, I think
personally,
I think there's definitely something. There's an advantage to hearing the words. And what I would say is that if someone, for instance, logs in on a Saturday morning here, they're going to get quite a few texts. That's hearing. We can't supply you with your full supply of verses for a week, maybe. I mean, you could still read on your own and learn, and I know you do and others do as well. But I do think it's important, and I think it's sort of tragic in a way that we've gotten out of this, call it a habit, but gotten out of people in general have not been listening to the pure words of Yehovah in the Hebrew Scriptures. they focus on other things. They focus, many within Judaism focus on the teachings of, in many cases, quite brilliant people who are commenting on the Hebrew Scriptures. Christians focus on the writings of people who are commenting on the Hebrew Scriptures. Well, why don't we just focus on the Hebrew Scriptures? It seems pretty simple, but yet so many people, I think, have taken it a different direction. They filtered it. Yeah. Think of it like an inline filter. I think it's important.
One of the nice things about the prophets is when you look at the Scriptures, as we've talked about before, that I know of in my readings, which are not as comprehensive as some people's, especially yours, is that, first of all, to be a prophet was a thankless job that was cast upon you. And even Jeremiah was like adamant about, I really don't want this job. Didn't have any choice. And it's every time a prophet was assigned to be a prophet, it was because people had turned away from the teachings, and their job was to turn them around. So the prophets come into play when you read them about, these are examples of how people deviated from the Scriptures, and God's attempt through the prophets to bring them home again.
Good point. And how many times does it say in Scripture, I sent my prophets to you morning, evening, and night, and you wouldn't listen? See, that's one of the biggest problems. What's that?
Where's that at?
In the Scriptures, yeah, over and over, he says, I sent to you morning and night my prophets, and they would talk to you and tell you to turn, and you wouldn't turn. So the idea, though, is that generally people don't listen. And so if we're not listening to the words of God through the prophets, what are we really learning? So what are we listening to? That could be a good question. What are we listening to? And if we're not taking heed, hearkening unto the words of the prophets, but we're learning and guarding and doing other things, then I'm not sure that that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Don't you think, I know that there's a New Testament scripture about the Word of God is sharp and powerful like a two-edged sword. So don't you think that reading the prophets and all the Torah actually is good to examine our hearts, to weigh it?
Oh, absolutely.
We can be convicted of wrong, going the wrong way.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like this Deuteronomy 31, that they may hear and learn and fear Jehovah your God, and guard to do all the words of this instruction, and that their children who have not known anything may hear and learn to fear Jehovah your God as long as you live in the land and so forth. So the idea is that as you listen and learn, what's the result of that? You are going to be in awe of this Creator and what it is that... But see, very few people pay heed to the actual words. It's always filtered. That's what bothers me, I think, more than anything.
And, like you pointed out, one of the statements that's in there is, this is for all Adam.
Yeah, absolutely.
All Adam, not just the Hebrew.
Yeah, and see, people tend to look at that and they go, well, those are the converts. People argue over that word, but it doesn't really say convert. I saw a person that I actually have a lot of respect for posted a commentary on a text which talked about all men, meaning all humanity who turn to these things. And the interpretation was that this involves the convert, meaning someone who is converting to Judaism. And look, I'm not trying to sound like I'm bashing. My point is to make people think. It's the Hebrew Scriptures, and it's open to all. Zechariah 8:23 talks about 10 men from all the languages of the nations grabbing the hem of the garment of a Jewish person, saying, we'll go with you, for we've heard that God is with you. And that text is generally looked to as, and that's what happens to us. When we wake up, we say, we're among the nations, and we go, where do I go? Well, I'm going to go to Judaism and so forth. But really, ultimately, if God is with the people of Israel, which He is, it's because of their adherence to this covenant that's described herein. So I think that it's real important that we go to the words themselves. That's
Right.
what we ought to hear.
But because if that's what God meant, I think that's what He would have said.
And it is open to all. Back to your point.
He said, this is for all Adam, all
Yeah.
the family of mankind.
Mm-hmm.
Not just for those. If He wanted converts, I think He would have said that.
Well, it's like whenever we look at Ruth
That's
is a
what he
great
said.
story. Ruth's story is great, especially during Shavuot. I'm sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
No, that was just one. I'm just going to add to the point. There's one rule,
Yeah,
Yeah. For all.
He
all
created
people.
all
Yeah.
mankind.
I mean, there's not one set of rules.
This
for
is
this.
his
Really
gift
not.
to all mankind, not just a small group of people.
Now, there arguably, and this is what generally happens, is people look at the text and it says, and you shall tell the children of Israel that they should do this, this, and this. So a lot of people will say, well-meaning people will say, well, see, it says Israel. You're not Israel. You're a non-Jew. As far as you know, you're a descendant of a Girgashite. Well, ultimately, though, the point of the Torah is that it would reach all the nations.
Sure.
You know?
So many people don't listen. They
That's
really
right.
don't listen. They hear you, but they don't listen.
Uh-huh.
Well, and it
There's
goes
a
back to
difference.
what Russ was saying about earlier on this
hear?
morning about the building of fences. You know, if you're going to guard, let's do it right. You know, let's dig a moat, let's put up a fence, let's put another fence,
Yep.
let's put barricade it. Before you know it,
Concertina
you're
wire.
so far away, you can't, and you got so much in front of you, like, you know, searching for crumbs in the middle of the night with a candle or whatever, that you can't read, you can't see the important stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and commentaries, doesn't matter who puts the commentaries out. There are some brilliant people who write commentaries, and they have wonderful insights in some of these commentaries. But there's nothing like reading the original scripture. You know, it's like someone described it as, you know, working through the works of people to get to the Word of God. You get the same sensation as a shower with a raincoat. You know, it takes away that closeness, that intimacy. I say get back to what it actually says. Now, and I do this all the time, you can look around, I use a lot of these commentaries because I want to know, what did some of the brilliant people see when they read this? And sometimes it's wonderful. But to go back and just see it for its face value, you know, what does it really, really say? And I think a lot of times these commentaries lead us off a little bit. You know, translation, I encourage people to study Hebrew at least to the point where you can, or use good English tools that allow you to get back to the text, because you can look up a word and say, what does that word mean? Blue Letter Bible is a free resource. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
On the internet. And so you don't have to spend lots and lots of money to get a good Bible program. You can look for no cost online, and you're able to get back at the original source. So I think that's important. What does it say? That's the key.
Yeah.
I wanted to add something to what I said before somebody says something and I get slammed. Traditions within groups of people are wonderful. Traditions is a way to pass things on and brings a group together, you know, a particular group of people. So having traditions is there's nothing wrong with having traditions unless you make them a barrier to what's important. In other words, there are certain, you know, Hebrew, Jewish, Celtic, whatever traditions, and those are all okay. And I didn't mean to make it sound like I was slamming anybody for searching for breadcrumbs with a candle.
No, I got
People
you.
do that.
I understand.
But
Yeah,
it just can't get in the way of what was intended.
yeah. Leslie points out that another free resource is called eSword. You know, so there are some really fabulous tools. I use, it's not free, but it's the Bible program I use is called Accordance, ACC, Accordance.
One-time cost thing, or
It is to get started, and then you can add modules. You know, the good thing about Accordance is you can you can piecemeal it, like I only want this and I want that, and it's been a long time since I bought mine. I think it's still this way.
You can decide what you want to listen to.
You can, yeah.
I'm just throwing
That's
that
right, yeah. You can choose different Greek versions, Latin, I mean, it's got everything. And so, but
I'm
that's a
confused
good
about
source.
something, Ross.
Yeah,
As you go through Deuteronomy, and which I've always liked, even before I was doing serious searching,
yeah,
I would find myself somehow in Deuteronomy decades ago.
yeah,
As you go through there, I don't understand what is so complicated when you read, like you said, just pick it up and read it. When you read through Deuteronomy and you go through, these are the 10 words I want to have with you, and the judgments that were passed as examples of how to implement those words by Moses, why would somebody draw the conclusion, and I'm just confused, I don't understand this, why would somebody or any group of people draw the conclusion that you can't, it's impossible to live to that?
yeah.
You can't do that. Which part of know God before me, love your neighbor, basically love your neighbor yourself, and that covers a lot of it. I'll go with Jesus on that one. Thou shalt not kill, all of that. What's so impossible about keeping that? I don't understand. I know that if you break it, you can break it, and that's a sin
Yeah.
in the eyes of God.
Are you talking about what's being taught in Christianity?
I'm talking
or
about
are you
in
talking
general,
about
because I've heard
general
I've had
people?
somebody say to me,
It's just too hard.
It's too
can't
hard.
keep it.
Nobody can possibly
Right.
keep
I think a
those.
lot of it has to do with the fences and traditions.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Not always bad. I mean, they can be bad.
Yeah.
We had,
All those stuff added to it. The little minor details of how you got to do this and do that.
Right.
I think that gets confused and I can't do all that.
Yeah.
it's what
You
you've
know?
been
Yeah.
taught.
Yeah.
It's really,
And
we
so
had
if you
a
go
back-
back to
The
the
simple-
word,
the simple-
what's so hard about
Yeah.
thou shalt not commit murder?
Right. Murder's murder.
Yeah, they would mostly
No
agree
other
on that
God
one.
before
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
I'm okay. You can choose to do something else.
But when you go to start defining what murder is and you start throwing in all kinds of, did this happen and motivations and, it gets confusing.
Well,
So I think that's the
If you're
question.
over about 7 or 10 years old, I think you can rationalize
I think
what
so.
the difference is.
But
between
generally,
killing and murder.
if you think about it, generally what happens is,
Seem that way.
I mean, I grew up in Christianity, and the prevalent idea was that no one can keep, that was the word they used, no one can keep these things. And God set the system up, and the Torah made you aware that you couldn't keep it. This is the prevailing thought. And so people have heard that, even though we have passages like Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 11 through 14 says it's not too difficult, it's not in heaven, it's not beyond the sea. So people get this idea that it is too hard. And then the other thing that's really, really taught, primarily in Christian circles, is that anyone who tries to keep and do these, in a way, is somehow trying to earn their salvation, which is a gift that's free, and it's not of works lest any man should boast. I mean, you know all these
You
passages.
got to work to keep it.
Yeah, so people,
all kinds of-
and then if you really press them and you say, well, can you commit adultery? No. Can you murder? No. Can you?
Steal.
They would say, no, you technically, so you're like, okay, work with me here. So you do keep some of these. What's the difference? And so I think people are a bit confused by it. But one thing that's consistent in the Hebrew Bible is that these moral and ethical teachings are very grounded, and they are consistent throughout the Hebrew Bible, that when you set forth to do them and live your life accordingly, you are following the way to blessing generally and life and so forth. And most people would agree with that. Look, most of the Christian people I know are very godly people. They live their life a very orderly way, and they want to serve God. They want to live according to God's rules. There's some humility built in there too, where they say, look, it's not anything I did, it's what God, so there is that. But I think that when a person reads these words, almost without exception, at least in principle at least, these things can be followed.
People get into doctrine.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Well, remember, we had a Baptist minister that was really trying to make his way through the traditional religious isms of his denomination, and he did a teaching on Deuteronomy 29. He said, I was reading this, and he said I had to get on my face, and he was really seeking God about what to do and what to teach. And he said, and I got out a piece of paper and pen, and I was determined these things, these blessings and cursings, to check my heart. Was I doing?
Yeah.
So there was that start there, but he, like you're saying, you're going against what you've been taught all your life and what denomination you've grown up in.
And James Tabor just pointed out, and I think a lot of us have come this way, so to speak. Most of the movement, call it the greater Torah faith movement, is being fed by fundamentalist Christians, evangelical Christians, who are reading their Bible. Their Bible, it's got an Old and a New Testament in it. And when they read it, they consider themselves looking for answer from, I've heard this phrase all my life, from the whole counsel of God.
Yes.
Right? And when you look at the whole counsel of God, they begin to see things like, Paul says, the law is holy and just. I mean, how should we sin the more that grace may abound? Heaven forbid. They start seeing these things. They see that these early followers of Jesus were keeping the commandments and so forth. So it causes something is stirring. And then people get into sort of an internal struggle. Well, I didn't think I had to keep the law. And their church members around them are going, you don't have to keep that. You can eat whatever you want. God made all foods clean. It says right there in the Gospel of Mark. But what's happening is, despite that, a large number of people are beginning to say, look, I just want to please my Father in heaven. And it is beautiful. It's where people are, they may not all agree. In fact, I don't think any of us agree totally on everything, but there is a undeniable draw towards the desire to be pleasing to God. And if we read that these things are desired from God, then that's what we seek to do. Now, people are all over the place. In a way, I taught at the conference on what some might consider just the opposite of what I taught today, but not really. But, the people were trying to keep the Passover, to do the Passover in 2 Chronicles 30. And they weren't doing it as written. Right? Yeah. I mean, look around us today, and there are all these different Hebrew roots movements who are doing Passover. They're all doing it a little differently, and certainly, I think maybe even taking liberties and looking at things, they're trying to find their way.
They are.
And they really are.
And we have the roadmap.
Yeah, and Hezekiah prays for them, and God says, it's okay. I got this.
I can, try to find my house. I can search for it. I can drive around. I eventually might run into it. I don't know, but you got a roadmap. We have clear instructions on how to get to somewhere.
Yeah.
So we gotta be able to use them. You gotta listen to them. You gotta pay attention to them.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like your wife saying, "Did you stop and ask for directions or whatever?"
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, people want to do.
I heard.
Don't ask any Hebrews. They got 20 years. They didn't ask for directions.
Yeah. On another note, I heard something about that. Wives asking their husbands that's actually emasculating your husband if you say, "Did you ask for directions?" Or is that a thing? Is that a no?
Well, you know, people generally, we all, in a way, sometimes I think there's a tendency to not worry about reading the instructions. You know, and a lot of times people, well-meaning, well-intentioned people who do love God, you know, will say, well, I just, in my heart, I believe, or I
That was
feel
back
it.
then,
you know.
all kinds of
But technically,
reasons.
what's happening now is even people whose heart is where they first got them drawn into this, they're looking now for specifics around what are the directions, what do the instructions mean. And like James, again, I just happened to look down, talking about guarding the Sabbath. You know, that's one of the 10 words that raises questions as to how. You know, there are a lot of different ideas. What does it mean to keep it holy? You know, what does it mean to not work? How do you define work? I mean, generally most of these ideas stem from somebody saying, I really want to do this right.
Sure.
So it goes back to the garden, you know. And I want this point to sink in because I think about it a lot. When they're in the garden, they're thinking, I know one thing, whatever I do, I don't want to eat from that tree. Well, honey, let's just don't look at it.
Yeah.
Don't even go around it. Don't touch it. Because if you get close, you know, you don't want to take that chance.
You might forget.
Yeah.
Your mouth might fall.
So you look at that, and the story, I think, is there as a warning,
It just ended up in my mouth.
you know?
I had somebody bring up one time that we weren't able to keep the full law, and he brought up the subject of the different, besides the 10 Commandments,
Yep.
10 words, all the other stuff were all, like the men couldn't cut their beards, and the
Yep.
women had to do this, that, and other, and I was like, well, there's certain laws for women, and there's certain laws for men,
Sure.
and no,
Yep.
I can't keep what is commanded of a man to do, but I
Yep.
try to do what God tells me to do.
Right.
So, you know,
That's right. No, that's a good point. Some of them apply only when you're in the land. Some,
Right.
you know, there are all these different. And to the point that we brought up earlier, there are some that are specific to Israelites. There really are. But ultimately, at least in principle, is the way I would put it. In principle, these things can be kept. They can be guarded. They can be, you know.
So in Deuteronomy 31:11, when it's talking about, is that one of the things that you pointed out, and this is about restoration?
Yeah.
About when all of Israel comes before God to, you know, that they read these words, and to the children that don't know anything, so they'll know how to keep the words. How
Comment, didn't it? Sorry.
He wouldn't.
How? The kids.
Yeah, to me, it's unity is very important. I was listening, by the way, Modest Yahoo's come out with a new song. Did you know that?
I didn't.
It's From Afar. There's the name of it. And he talks about when we do what's right, there will be this unity.
When we what?
When we do what's right.
Oh, do what's right.
Talking about doing what's right. That's one of the lyrics I caught. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have time to listen to much of it, but it seems that it's Israel. When Israel, and I know this, you taught on this, you know, United Israel, World Union. When Israel gets united on these things, then the world union, this unity will happen. I guess that's what I'm aiming for is this quest to learn how to do it right, to learn
Yeah.
how to listen, to learn what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and I think it's tiered, T-I-E-R. I think in a way, individually, we ought to seek to live our lives according to the principles. Collectively, we ought to seek to, you know, work in a community to live, because some of these things simply, it's almost impossible to do individually. Some of these require the community. And then, you know, some of them go beyond that to the national level and so forth. but it's the individual things. Like an example would be Yom Kippur. Someone could say to me, Ross, you can't keep Yom Kippur, on your own because it involves the high priest and these two goats and, and so forth. And I said, well, the part that I do, I never would do the high priest part anyway. That's not for me. To your point, Jerry, I don't have anything to do with picking the goats or choosing the lots, none of that. But you know what I can do? I can abase myself on that day. I can make myself low, is the way the Hebrew puts it. I can do that. And I don't need, now if somebody goes, well, we can't do Yom Kippur until we get the temple and we got the goats and we got, no.
Yeah.
That's what somebody else has to do on that day. My part never changed. Isn't it interesting that a lot of these things we can do on our own? But a lot of times we want to say, well, until Dave does his part, I ain't doing mine.
Typical, just,
Yeah.
sounds like kids growing up.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The
Very
problem
Well, he didn't do it.
with
Yeah.
this concept that is put before us that we cannot keep the commandments gives a license to sin.
Right.
It sets that before you like it's okay because we can't do it anyway.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
And I
Why
gotta
even
get
try?
a
Yeah.
jail-free card.
Yeah.
I think that's a selfish thought, though, on our parts, because God is telling us that we can
Yes.
keep it,
Sure.
that we can do it, that we can guard it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you
You know,
break
we have-
one, he said, you turn towards me, I'll turn towards
That's
you.
right.
That's right.
So, there's a key there for forgiveness as well. The Ten Commandments, at least in our country and many others, were established as the basis for the rule of law.
Yeah.
So you got the rules, like with Moses, where he goes in there and he sits in judgment and he gives examples of how to implement the rule of law. Same thing in this and many other countries with the Ten Commandments, the basis for the rule of law. So you got the laws of God and the laws of man. Laws of man, in many cases, reflect the laws of God. So you can be held accountable for the laws of man, but you have to reconcile a violation of the laws of God with him.
Mm-hmm. It's it.
Listening,
No, go ahead.
listening, I gotta get this in there somehow, but listening is an art. It really is. It's hard to do. It's not easy to listen. I mean, we all hear, but anyway.
Yeah.
But actually, to give your focus 100% to what somebody's saying, it's really hard to do. Your mind wants to think what you're gonna say next. How many of y'all had a conversation with somebody and you can just tell they're not listening? They hear you, but they're really thinking about what they're gonna say next. And especially if it's a dialogue or a debate on doctrine, they're trying to think counterpoints while you're pointing. So, my point here is just that the art of listening is very hard to do. It's hard to shut up and listen, turn your mind off, and try to hear what somebody's trying to say. And then you can decide. But I just want to throw that in there.
No, that's a good point.
Whatever it's worth, Dave, I hang on every word you say.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, but it is good to think about what is it, because we rarely, like the old story goes, you're given 2 ears and 1 mouth. You ought to listen at least twice as much as you talk, which I probably don't do. But the idea though is that you're given this ability to take information in, and I think it's really important in the learning process. It's why I've never really liked video, and Dave and I have talked about that. Audio. I've always said, look, I don't care if the video works as long as we have an audio of it. And others have told me, no, people, they love video. People want to see, they want to feel like they're part of it. But I have a vision for audio, is the way I've put it in the past. I would love to see millions of people huddled around like an old-style radio show where they're listening and they're truly learning and they're flipping their Bibles around. To me, that's what this world needs, is to listen again. We're so deceived by what our eyes see, and we're so enamored with these.
Technology,
Well,
oh my
there's the
God.
idea of the imagination too. It's kind of like the difference between reading a book and watching a video. If you're reading a book or if you're listening to audio, you have the ability to kind of use your imagination to
Yeah.
see a picture, you
To
know?
visualize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To visualize, and then, but if you,
Yeah, I just have always liked, because people are always judging, and I think sometimes, if you look at the fancy sets that are involved in some of these certain ministries, let's just say, and I'm not thinking of any particular one, but the visual is the most important. It's that perceptual, what is it that the people are going to
fake
see?
people out with that,
But so here's what I think is important. It's the content of the message. It's not so much the look of the messenger or the, any of that. It's what is coming forth. There's a word that's coming forth. And to me, I think that the heart of the revival that is to come will be fueled by what comes out of the mouth and into the ear of those, who are listening, Here, think about this. There's a famine in the world today. Not a famine of food and water, saith Jehovah, but a famine of hearing the words of Jehovah. How did I start today's lesson? Deuteronomy talks about listen to the voice. Listen to the voice of Jehovah. Only in Deuteronomy. Nobody else talks about it. Why? I don't know. It's in Deuteronomy. And so I think it's important that we think about what's the food for the famine?
Hearing the word.
Hearing the word. Do you know that that's in Ezekiel 37, the resurrection of Israel?
Yep.
The first prophecy that goes forth is, hear the word of Jehovah, you bones. You hear how the air conditioner shut off when I said that?
I wanted to listen.
It said, hear the word of Jehovah. That's the first thing that happens. And that begins the facilitation of the return. It comes when people hear.
So, guess I'm gonna have to get that Bible and tapes out again and get an old Walkman with headphones. No, I do love podcasts.
Yeah.
And especially when I'm working in the garden,
Yeah.
to put headphones on or
You ain't gonna
something
clean your ears
and to
out.
hear.
Charlton Heston.
What?
Charlton Heston has a set.
Oh, yeah.
And that sounds like
Yeah.
Moses is
Yeah.
reading it
Oh,
too.
yeah.
I have one in my car right now.
Yeah.
Charlton Heston?
The Charlton
Yeah.
Heston
Yeah.
version? Yeah, we had one. I think we donated. Mary Vaught has a
I mean, he's
a
he's the only
question
Moses I
that I'd
know.
like to address
That
real
Bill
quick.
Cosby.
Um, Mary was saying a lady, she had a question about idolatry and dolls, how children get dolls. She said a lady she worked with made an Amish doll and it's hanging on her door and she's concerned that it might be someone said it might be an idol. And Mary, I think if you would listen a few weeks back,
Yeah, we
you
talked about
talked, look for Ross's teaching on idols and what is an idol and what is not.
She's not just
Because-
proud of what she made, or
Children, baby dolls, even my 102-year-old mother, baby dolls and little dolls, that's so important for children to be able to play out,
Yeah.
feelings. I personally, especially after listening to your teachings, I don't believe a doll is an idol unless you're bowing down to it and worshiping
Right.
it and
Yeah.
attributing to it some kind of power to, supersede God.
Now there are different opinions
Yeah.
out there. My view is that is not. I know people. I remember not too long ago. It's been within the last 10 years. See how time flies now. It's not too long ago, 10 years. But I met a girl who was very biblically literate, loved God, and she told me this particular person. I thought this was kind of strange. But she didn't even have a driver's license because they wanted a picture to be taken of her, and she felt that was an image, and that was, Anyway, so there are different people. I'm way liberal on this then.
Yeah.
But I think I'm more literal when it comes to what is an idol and what is it, which, as you pointed out. So I don't think that dolls are.
Oh, yeah.
Now, some would say, yes, they are. It
We
says,
we had people come to us when we were doing children's ministry with puppets, quoting
Yeah.
those verses about the images and, oh, you can't do that, that's idolatry.
Yeah.
Use
I
it as
thought the whole
puppets.
point, though, the way the text reads, is the graven images of anything above the earth or underneath the earth or in the sea or whatever, was to the point of making an idol.
Before me,
worship.
though. See, that's,
Not-
you gotta
not as
remember
a-
that word
not as a
before
toy.
me.
yeah, you shall not bow yourself down to them
Yeah.
nor
Didn't
serve
say
them.
Get rid of all these
Right.
images, it said just don't have them before me.
So again, this is part of the various interpretations. People go, well, what does it mean? I'm not even going to make a baby doll, or I'm not going to, and there are some legitimate concerns. I'm not making fun. People, generally, when people come up with these additional rules and stack these up, it is out of a desire to be sure that one is following the ways of God in a pure way.
But I think the problem comes when they take that and they're going possibly, excuse the expression, overboard.
Yeah,
But when they defer that onto somebody else and say, this is the right way,
yeah.
you need to do this.
Trying to get them to listen to you.
Yeah, this is.
When you didn't listen to the word.
Yeah,
to
that's
begin
not
with.
what it says, but you're going, no, you're putting
Yeah.
that fence up there so
Yeah.
you get close to the tree,
Right, right.
and you don't want them to either. Well, that's not what was
Yeah,
said.
no.
Yeah, Pam was just saying, it's like this idea, you want to say, is,
Well, it was don't add to and don't take away.
yeah.
That's the category that seems to be falling.
Yeah, we can make these, our imaginations can run away with us, and we can go, oh, well, if that's that, then this is that. And then ultimately, let's say that someone comes in this door right now. Let's use a real life example. And they said, hey, thank God y'all are open today. My car, I just ran out of gas, and my 104-year-old mother is in there, and we don't have any water, and could you please help me? I've got, and would say, oh, man.
Any day but today.
Would you be okay if maybe you can get some water out of the sink, but we'll help you tomorrow?
Right.
Or at 6 p.m. we can help, but not right now.
Yeah.
So is it ever bad
To do good.
to do good on the Sabbath?
My life trumps all that. It really does. That's pretty well established, like doctors.
Yeah, that's right.
EMT people,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to the blessings and the chasing of the bad thing, just because you're doing your best to try and follow, doesn't mean that things can't go awry in your life.
That's why I said, yeah, bad things do happen to good people.
And it doesn't have to be a bad thing, just
Yeah.
Things.
daily things happen,
Yeah.
You get a flat tire on your bike and you gotta walk it all the way back.
Yeah.
It
leave
happens.
Yeah.
Teresa's got a good point. Cherubim
Cherubim.
on the ark were carved images, but they weren't worshipped. That's a good, good point for me.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Yeah.
so, art and that kind of stuff. I've known people, religious people, that wouldn't have a TV because that,
Yep.
they decided that since we got to sit in front of it and watch it, we must be worshiping.
Yep.
So yeah, it's
Yeah, it is interesting. That's a good analogy about the ark and even in the tabernacle and so forth. But one thing is sure is that at least according to Jeremiah 3, there won't be another one made.
there you go.
So you have to wonder, why is that?
There you go.
So what will be the heavenly temple?
Yeah.
Just say that.
Stuff in there.
Well, I used to tell people, it's like my Sabbath, Friday nights I usually stay up pretty late working on a class, and I teach during the day Saturday, and, I would look forward to Sunday. I mean, that was to me,
Sleep in.
man, if I could, but it was the day that I could rest finally. Now, it didn't mean that I changed my Sabbath, because Shabbat is Shabbat, but so Amy talks about Levitical duties, I don't claim to be a priest or prophet or anything like that,
No,
but
it's the same
but my
idea.
role, Dave's role, Dave has to do certain things every week to get the message out. There are people who interpret what we do as violating the Sabbath. you know, because we shouldn't use electricity. We shouldn't, you know.
Turn on a switch.
Yeah, the same people didn't realize that to back in the day, to go to the Sabbath service, somebody had to open the door.
Yeah.
Somebody had to unlock it or whatever they did. You know, I don't know. But I'm just
Yep.
saying. Sweep it, whatever. They
Mothers
got
had to
the-
take care of their children.
Yep,
Yeah,
that's right.
well, that's a
Had to
good
take care
point.
of their children. I mean, I'm sure they didn't
When
let
they're
them
old,
starve,
102
you
year old
know.
mother.
They had to feed them. Yeah, right, you know.
Just didn't let them run
I
wild.
saw an interesting comment on
Yeah.
our United Israel Facebook group. Someone said, well, I can tell you this from working a dairy farm,
Oh,
that
no,
Saturdays,
no.
you don't just not go milk.
Yeah.
You have to milk. And so there would be some who would say, you know, well, that, I don't know, what do you do? But these are things that are practical ideas. You have to think them.
Right.
You know, well, am I, you know, the mama cow, the milk
she's
cow
gonna
is
be
going to be miserable if you don't. So there are things we have to take care of children. We have to take care of ourselves, our families.
Animals.
You know, so I think a lot of people, truly dear people who want to follow the Torah, find themselves condemning themselves quite often. You know, oh, I'm violating them.
Now, what you can do now, you got the little sticker on your car saying when you're supposed to change your oil, you know, the date or whatever.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, it's just that. You know, you can wait the next day to do that.
That's right.
There's things you can do.
That's
you know,
exactly
that
right.
Can wait.
Yeah.
You know, I
Do-
think that's the heart of the deal.
Do everything you can. You know, and the Sabbath is, in a way, it really is made for you. It's for you to rest.
It is.
And I love, you know, I talked about the differences in Exodus and Deuteronomy. One of the things about the difference is that in Deuteronomy, one of the reasons for the Sabbath, everybody wonders about, you know, I want to take the day off, I can't work, I can't. But what does Deuteronomy 5 say? Interesting. It's so you shall rest. You know why? So others can rest.
So others can
Yeah.
rest.
See, what if the whole point
About 'em.
You don't go
is
to a
about-
restaurant so that people, yeah.
Yeah, what if the whole point is you should be doing what you do, whatever that is, to ensure that others rest? See, if we flip that and we go, it's all about me, 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 I can't work, I can't do this, I can't do that, what is work, I can't do that, then it's about me. But if it's about, man, you know what? I want to make sure I'm not going to go till the ground today because Bessie the cow needs a break, because my oxen need a break.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make sure that they get plenty of cool, clear water today. You know, some might say, well, you can't haul water. See, the idea is, how do you help others rest? That's the reason I love Deuteronomy. So,
Somewhere in the prophets it says, you know, the Sabbath is not for doing your pleasure on his day.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And in a way, that means the same thing, right? It's not about me. It's
And that brings me up to the point of the beauty of this whole Torah walk is that you have 6 days to do your pleasure, pretty much. I
Yeah.
mean, you know,
Well,
you know,
before
not,
that
not to be
time-
taken out of context,
Yeah.
but you know, you have 6 days to do
He
your
gives
work.
us-
You have 6 days to do what you
Before that
want
was
to
brought
do.
out, people used to work 7 days a week.
Yeah.
There was no day off, ever.
Who's that?
Everybody. It was 7 days a week.
Egypt slaves working all the time.
Yeah,
7
day
days.
in, day out. Sometimes at night.
mm-hmm.
So that was a big deal, going to the 6-day work week.
A break. It's a break.
Of course, I was just jesting the last time we had this conversation. I
Right.
said, I don't know what you're complaining about. You only work 1 day a week anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's true.
Nothing, but yeah, you know,
Now that Bridget's home.
Oh, yeah, she loves him, huh?
he's like, oh, I can see it now.
I can take the jokes.
I'm glad Friday's here.
I do. I would. You know, I would challenge people though, if they do think that is true. Hopefully, people don't. That they could come keep up with me. Just do it a week.
That's why I
You
said it was
should
a
have-
jest.
I know.
That's what
Well, you know, because you come up here, but the idea though is that we do everything we can to model our life on this Hebrew faith. And I think that the lesson today sort of gave us a structure in which to do that. Listen, learn, guard, and do. And if it comes across any way other than meaningful to point us in the right direction, please don't be offended.
Right.
Because the goal really is to tell people, listen, I just told you one of the important reasons, that this is food for famine. You know, I want people to listen, because that's when the restoration begins, when they hear the word of Jehovah. So you listen. Why do you learn? You learn because that's the only way to apply these things. And then you teach others,
Right.
same thing, you know. So you listen, you learn, you guard, which is very important, and it's one that has not been done very well over the ages. For good and bad intents, you know, people have added to and taken from.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. Now, I believe that within this document, in its current state, is that authentic word.
Sure.
Within this document. People have added to it and corrupted and, and all their different
Even in
beliefs.
that document.
Jeremiah says
That's what
that,
he said.
right?
Yeah.
So once you get past that, I think that it is important that we do, because ultimately by doing it in that order, people will begin to look and say, what a wise and understanding people this is. And look, it's not just for one group. It's ultimately for the entire world.
Right.
Yeah, that's important.
So never discourage someone from wanting to do something that God's Word tells them to do. You know, if somebody says, well, look, I don't eat whatever because the Torah, hey, that's great. That's great. You know why? Because they're saying, look, if God said that this is important, it's important to me. Why would you tell somebody, nah, you don't have to worry about that, you eat whatever? Now, if someone who doesn't care they don't care to model their way, I don't go to somebody who doesn't even care about this and say, you shouldn't eat that.
You don't
you
go
know.
snatching
No.
catfish out of people's hands.
Right.
No.
You don't slap the crawfish out of your family's hand. You just tell them.
Pork maybe, that's a little dangerous.
Don't choke.
Yeah. Hey, it's a beautiful day.
Yes.
I want to tell people Shabbat Shalom. We're looking forward to next week already. But in the meantime, have a wonderful and relaxing rest of your Sabbath. And have a good week ahead. Shavua Tov. So, beautiful week.
Hey,
Shabbat
Sarah. Bye, Sarah. Have a great day, Sarah. I love you.
Shalom. Bye, Sarah.
I go zoom in on it if you want to.
No, that's okay.
So
Got it?
it's
You got it?
Shema.